The rifle cracked. The target shattered at 1,200 yards. Every scope in the observation tower swung toward Lane 7. Silence fell like a hammer. The scoreboard flickered, then locked. 100%. Perfect. Impossible. The commentator's voice died mid-sentence. She didn't look up, didn't celebrate, just breathed, reset, chambered another round. Her hands moved like water over stone. Ancient, certain, unhurried. The wind shifted. She adjusted half a degree, fired again. Another perfect hit. The crowd erupted, but she remained still as the mountains that raised her. In the VIP section, a 3-star general leaned forward, binoculars trembling in his grip. Beside him, a Pentagon analyst frantically scrolled through her tablet, cross-referencing scores that shouldn't exist. The woman in Lane 7 had appeared from nowhere. No military academy pedigree, no Olympic training background, no corporate sponsorship. Just a name from a reservation in Montana and a qualification score that had seemed like a clerical error. Until now. The competition had drawn the world's elite. Russian Spetsnaz champions, British SAS veterans, Israeli Defense Force legends, Chinese special operations instructors, 47 shooters from 23 nations, medals glinting on chests, decades of training behind every trigger pull. And she was destroying them all with the quiet efficiency of someone collecting firewood. She rose from the prone position, dust falling from her elbows. Her rifle, a standard-issue platform, nothing custom, nothing exotic, rested in her arms like it had grown there. She walked to the next firing line. Her boots were worn. Her uniform was regulation but faded from sun and use. No patches except the small American flag on her shoulder, and a single subdued unit insignia no one in the tower recognized. The next stage, moving targets, 800 yards, wind gusting to 15 knots, 6 seconds per engagement, the kind of test that separated competent shooters from artists, the kind where even champions missed half their shots. The buzzer sounded. She dropped to one knee. The world compressed into breath, wind, heartbeat, target. 6 shots, 6 hits. The electronic sensors didn't just confirm hits, they showed impact patterns clustered within a 2-inch circle, at 800 yards, on moving targets, in wind. The range officer actually stood up from his chair, walked to the sensor array, and checked the calibration. Everything was perfect. She was just better. In the crowd, a Scandinavian sniper instructor who'd won this competition twice turned to his teammate and said something in Norwegian that translated roughly to, "That's not possible." His teammate, a woman who'd medaled at the last Olympics, just shook her head slowly. They'd both seen something beyond technique, beyond training. This was something older. The general in the VIP box made a phone call. It was answered before the first ring finished. "Sir, you need to see this," he said. "I don't know what we're looking at, but we need to know everything about her. Yesterday." He paused, listening. "No, sir, not exaggerating. I've been doing this 30 years. I've never seen anything like it." She moved to the final stage. Unknown distance, single shot, target revealed for 3 seconds, then concealed. The shooter had to estimate range, calculate windage and elevation, and execute, all on mental mathematics and instinct. Most competitors took 2 or 3 attempts. Some never hit at all. It was designed to be brutally difficult. The target appeared, a silhouette at some point beyond 1,000 yards. Exact distance unknown. 3 seconds of visibility. She didn't use a rangefinder, didn't consult any data. She simply looked, adjusted her scope with 2 small clicks, settled her breathing and fired before the target even disappeared. The impact sensor registered before the concealment curtain fully deployed. Dead center. First round. The observation tower erupted. Even the competitors, hardened warriors who rarely showed emotion, were on their feet. The Russian team leader, a man with a chest full of medals from Chechnya and Syria, started a slow clap that rippled through the entire range. She finally looked up then, not at the applause, but at the sky. Checking the light. There were still 2 stages remaining. Between stages, a reporter managed to breach the competitor area. Microphone extended, camera rolling, he approached her while she cleaned her rifle with methodical precision. "How did you learn to shoot like that?" he asked. "Who trained you?" She looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were dark, calm, and completely unimpressed by his urgency. "My grandfather," she said. Her voice carried the rhythm of someone who'd grown up speaking 2 languages, English arriving second. "He learned from his grandfather. We've been hunting these mountains for more time than your country has existed." The reporter blinked. "But this is military precision shooting, advanced ballistics. This is reading wind," she interrupted gently. "Reading light, understanding distance, respecting the weapon, respecting the target. My people have been doing this since we had to make every shot count because there wouldn't be another one. Because our families ate or starved based on whether we could hit a deer at 400 yards with iron sights." She returned to cleaning her rifle. The interview was over. The Pentagon analyst had pulled her full file by then. High school in rural Montana, enlisted at 18, infantry, then scout sniper school, graduated top of her class but quietly, no fanfare, no media attention, assigned to a forward reconnaissance unit, 3 deployments, commendations for actions that remained classified. Then she'd requested transfer to the reserves and returned home. "Why isn't she active duty?" the general asked. The analyst scrolled further. "She put in for separation 2 years ago. Request was approved. Reason listed. Family obligation." More scrolling. "Her grandfather passed away 6 months after she returned. After that, she took a job as a hunting guide on the reservation. She's been living in the same town she grew up in. And she's here why? National team trials. She qualified 6 months ago. Showed up to the regional competition, shot a perfect score, got invited to nationals, did the same thing. Mandatory inclusion for the international championship based on performance." The analyst looked up. "Sir," she wasn't hiding. "We just weren't paying attention. Stage 5 began. Stress shooting. S. Physical exhaustion protocol first. 2-mile run in full gear, then immediate transition to shooting positions. Designed to simulate combat conditions. Heart rate elevated, breathing compromised, muscles fatigued. This was where mental discipline separated from physical capability. She ran the 2 miles in the middle of the pack. Not fast, not slow. Efficient. When she reached the firing line, her breathing was controlled within 30 seconds. The other shooters were still gasping. She engaged 6 targets at varying distances while her heart rate was still above 140 beats per minute. 6 hits. The sports medicine team monitoring biometrics actually requested a sensor check. Her physiological control was beyond athletic. It was meditative. A Navy SEAL instructor in the observation area leaned over to his Army Ranger counterpart. "We need to talk to her." "Get in line," the Ranger replied. "I just got a text from SOCOM. They want a full workup. She's reserve. Not for long if they have anything to say about it." Below, she had moved to the barricade shooting stage. Awkward positions, unnatural angles, limited time. The kind of shooting that revealed whether someone had merely memorized techniques or truly understood principles. She flowed from position to position like water finding cracks in stone. High port, low port, strong side, weak side, every shot connected. The Chinese team captain, a man who'd won this competition 3 times, approached the Russian team leader during the break. They spoke in English, the common language of the range. "She's not military shooting," the Chinese captain said. "No," the Russian agreed. "It's something else. Hunter shooting, but refined. More than refined, perfected." The Russian watched her through binoculars as she sat alone, drinking water, eyes on the distant mountains. "She shoots the way my grandmother cooked. Like it's not a skill. Like it's breathing." The Chinese captain nodded slowly. "We've spent decades building training programs, technology, science, and someone learned to shoot better than all of us by hunting food for their family." Stage 6, the nightmare stage. Low light, thermal imaging compromised by environmental conditions, targets at extreme range with minimal contrast. Even spotters struggled to identify target locations. The failure rate on this stage historically exceeded 60%. It was a test of perception as much as marksmanship. She waited for full dusk, let her eyes adjust naturally. While other shooters fumbled with night vision equipment, she simply watched the shadows, reading the landscape the way her grandfather had taught her to read animal trails. When the targets appeared, barely visible heat signatures against cooler backgrounds, she engaged them with the same calm precision she'd shown all day. 4 targets, 4 hits, in conditions where most shooters couldn't even locate the targets. The range sensors showed her shot group across all 4 targets could be covered by a dinner plate, at 900 yards, in near darkness. The technical experts monitoring the sensors started writing notes for a report they knew would be classified immediately. The general made another call. This one went directly to the Pentagon. "I need authorization for immediate recruitment discussion," he said. "I don't care what regulations say about approaching competitors during active competition. We can't let her walk out of here without at least having a conversation." "Denied," came the response. "Let the competition finish. We do this right or we don't do it at all. She's a U.S. citizen, not a foreign asset. We have time." The final stage arrived. The unknown challenge. Every year, the competition included one classified test revealed only at execution. This year, it was a simulation of a real-world hostage scenario. Single-shot opportunity, hostage target at 1,000 yards, positioned inches from an adversary target. Margin for error, 0. Miss by 6 inches left, you kill an innocent. Miss by 6 inches right, the adversary survives and the scenario fails. The other shooters had gone first. 3 complete misses, 2 hits on the wrong target. 1 graze that would have wounded both targets. Everyone else declined the shot, the professional choice when success seemed impossible. Better to preserve your score than risk catastrophic failure. She studied the scenario for 90 seconds. The wind had shifted 3 times in the last 10 minutes. The light was fading. The targets were partially concealed behind simulated structural cover. Every variable was hostile. She settled into position, made her calculations, and waited. Not for perfect conditions. Those wouldn't come. She waited for the moment when all the chaos aligned into a single breath of possibility. The wind settled. Just for 3 seconds. She fired. The impact sensor on the adversary target lit up, center mass. The hostage target remained dark. Perfect execution. The range fell silent. Then the applause started, building like thunder across the valley. Even the competitors who'd failed the stage were clapping. This wasn't just skill. This was art. The award ceremony was scheduled for dusk. But the media had already surrounded her staging area. She sat on her equipment case, rifle disassembled for cleaning, and ignored them all. Security kept them at distance, but their cameras and questions formed a wall of noise. She worked methodically, cleaning each component with the same care she'd shown everything else today. A shadow fell across her workspace. She looked up. The 3-star general stood there, alone, having dismissed his security detail. He had the weathered look of someone who'd spent decades in the field before the Pentagon absorbed him. Recognition flickered in her eyes, not of him specifically, but of what he represented. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the equipment case beside her. She nodded. He sat carefully, respecting the space. For a long moment, they both watched the sun descend toward the mountains. He broke the silence first. "That was the most impressive display of marksmanship I've seen in 32 years of service." "Thank you, sir. I have to ask, why aren't you active duty? Someone with your abilities, we have units that would consider you a strategic asset." She continued cleaning her rifle. "I was active duty, 3 tours, did my job. But my grandfather was dying, and he was the last person who remembered our old ways. Someone had to learn them before they disappeared. The general processed this. Your old ways, traditional hunting techniques, traditional everything, language, stories, how to read the land, how to move through it, how to be part of it instead of just crossing it." She held up a rifle component, inspected it against the fading light. "The military taught me precision, equipment, tactics, but my grandfather taught me why those things matter. Taught me that every shot is a responsibility, not just a skill. He taught you well. He taught me what his grandfather taught him, what his grandfather's grandfather taught him. The techniques are old. Older than this country. We just adapted them to modern rifles. Would you consider returning to active duty, special operations, training role? You could teach others to shoot like me?" She finally looked at him directly. "Sir, with respect, you can't teach someone to shoot like me in a 12-week course. This took a lifetime. It took growing up tracking deer through forests in winter. It took learning to be hungry enough that missing meant your family didn't eat. It took sitting with my grandfather for 10,000 hours, listening to him explain why the wind moves differently through pine than aspen, why morning light lies about distance, why you respect the animal you're hunting enough to kill it clean." The general nodded slowly. "I understand, but the offer stands. If you ever change your mind, you call me directly." He handed her a card with a phone number and nothing else. She took it, read it, and tucked it into her pocket. "I appreciate it, sir, but I have responsibilities. My community is small. We're losing our language, losing our traditions. I'm one of 6 fluent speakers under 40. If I leave again, some of that knowledge dies, and that's a different kind of warfare, slower, quieter, but just as real." He understood then. This wasn't about refusing opportunity. This was about choosing a different battle. "For what it's worth," he said, standing, "what you did today will matter. There are people who think traditional skills are obsolete. That technology replaces foundation. You just proved them wrong on a world stage." She smiled for the first time all day. "I just shot straight, sir. My grandfather would have expected nothing less." The ceremony began as the sun touched the horizon. Flags from 23 nations hung in the still air. The competitors assembled in formation, and she stood among them, neither hiding nor displaying prominence. The announcer's voice carried across the range, recounting the day's impossible performances, building toward the final results everyone already knew. 3rd place, the Russian team captain. Decades of experience, 3 previous championships, a legend in the community. He accepted his medal with dignity and genuine respect for those who'd beaten him. 2nd place, the British SAS veteran, a woman who'd medaled at the Olympics before joining the military. She smiled, nodded to the champion, understanding what she'd witnessed. And the International Target Championship, with a perfect aggregate score across all stages, the first perfect score in the 40-year history of this competition. The pause held weight, history compressing into a single breath. Representing the United States of America. She walked forward as her name was announced. The crowd rose as one. Not just applause, something deeper. The recognition of witnessing a performance that transcended competition. The medal was placed around her neck, heavy and cold against her chest. She stood at attention, facing the flags, as the national anthem played. And for just a moment she let herself feel it. Pride. Not in the victory, but in honoring everything she'd been taught. The Russian captain approached her immediately after, hand extended. "I would consider it an honor to train with you someday, to understand your methods." "You're welcome on the reservation any time," she replied, shaking his hand. "I guide hunters every fall. Come shoot with us. But I should warn you, we walk a lot, and we don't always find the shot we're looking for." The British veteran joined them. "Is it true? You learned to shoot hunting with your grandfather?" "Yes, ma'am." "Not at some elite academy? Not with Olympic coaches?" "No, ma'am. Just my grandfather, the mountains, and a lot of hungry winters." The British shooter laughed, a sound of pure amazement. "I spent 6 years at the best training facilities in Europe, and I just got beaten by someone who learned to shoot because they needed to eat. That's the most military thing I've ever heard." The media descended then, a tsunami of questions and cameras. She answered them patiently but briefly. Yes, she learned from her grandfather. Yes, she's from Montana. Yes, she's in the reserves. No, she doesn't plan to go active duty. Yes, she guides hunters. No, she doesn't use any special equipment. Just standard rifles, standard ammunition, and traditional knowledge. A young reporter, maybe 25, asked, "What do you think this win means for Native American representation in competitive shooting?" She considered the question carefully. "I think it means what it's always meant. We've been here. We've been shooting. We've been part of this land longer than there have been competitions to win. Maybe now people will pay attention. Maybe now they'll ask why we're good at this. And maybe they'll listen when we explain that we've been the original snipers, the original hunters, the original conservationists. This isn't new for us. It's just new for everyone else to notice. As the sun finally set and the crowds began to disperse, she returned to her staging area to collect her equipment. The general was there again, waiting quietly. With him was the Pentagon analyst and two other officers she didn't recognize. "I know I said I'd wait," the general began, "but I need to show you something. Just 5 minutes of your time." She nodded, exhaustion finally showing in her shoulders. They led her to a secure tent where a laptop sat on a folding table. The analyst opened a file. "These are satellite images from a recent operation. Classified, but you have clearance from your service time." The images showed mountainous terrain, scattered compounds, high-altitude challenges. "We lost 2 operators trying to make shots in this environment. The conditions defeated our best technology, our best training." Another image. "This is a reservation in Montana. Similar elevation, similar terrain, similar wind patterns." The analyst looked at her. "You grew up here. You hunt here. You know how to operate here in ways we're still trying to teach with million-dollar programs." The second officer spoke up. "We're not asking you to enlist. We're asking you to consult, 2 weeks a year. Come to our facilities. Teach our instructors what you know about reading terrain, about indigenous knowledge applied to modern systems. Be a bridge." She studied the images, saw her homeland reflected in foreign mountains, understood the implication. "You want me to teach soldiers how to think like hunters?" "We want them to survive," the general said quietly. "And we think you know things we've forgotten, or never learned." She was quiet for a long time. 2 weeks a year. I choose when. I choose what I teach. And I bring someone from my community with me. Someone who knows the language, the stories. This doesn't become a military program. It becomes a cultural exchange. You learn from us, we make sure it's taught, right? The general extended his hand. "Deal." She shook it. "I'll need that in writing. And I'll need approval from my tribal council. We don't share sacred knowledge, but hunting techniques, land reading, conservation practices that we can teach. If it saves lives and honors the old ways, my grandfather would approve." The ceremony was officially over. Competitors were loading equipment, saying goodbyes, exchanging contact information. She packed her rifle case with the same methodical care she'd shown all day. The medal hung around her neck, catching the last light. Tomorrow she'd drive home, 12 hours across Montana, back to the reservation. Back to her responsibilities. But tonight, she stood on the range one more time, alone. The targets were dark silhouettes against the deepening blue of dusk. She didn't need to shoot. She'd proven everything that needed proving. Instead, she just stood there, feeling the wind, reading the light, being present in the landscape the way her grandfather had taught her. A memory surfaced. 7 years old, too small to hold the rifle steady, crying because she'd missed a deer her family needed. Her grandfather kneeling beside her, hand on her shoulder. "Crying doesn't honor the deer or the shot. You learn, you practice, you respect both, and next time, you do better." She'd done better. Every day since then, she'd done better. And tomorrow, she'd go home and keep doing better. Teaching the young ones, preserving the language, hunting the old ways. The medal was proof she'd succeeded, but it wasn't the success itself. The success was being able to stand here, in this moment, and know her grandfather would be proud, not because she won, but because she remembered everything he taught her. In the Pentagon, reports were already being written. Analysts were compiling data. Recruitment strategies were being revised, but none of that mattered to her. What mattered was the wind in her face, the mountains in the distance, and the knowledge that she carried forward something precious and old and worth more than any championship. She picked up her equipment, slung her rifle case over her shoulder, and walked into the gathering darkness. Behind her, the range lights clicked on one by one. Ahead, the road home stretched out under emerging stars. And in her pocket, a general's card and a promise to bridge 2 worlds, the ancient and the modern, the traditional and the tactical, the hunter and the warrior. The drive home took her through the night and into the next day. She stopped once at a rest area in Wyoming and called her aunt, told her about the competition, listened to her aunt's pride and tears, promised to be home by dinner, promised to tell the story properly, the way stories should be told. with time, with context, with respect for those who came before. When she finally crossed into the reservation, the sun was setting again, golden light across familiar mountains. She rolled down her window, breathed the air of home. The medal was in her bag now, hidden. It didn't matter. What mattered was the knowledge she carried, the tradition she protected, the community she served. A week later, she was guiding hunters again, a father and son from Minnesota, their first elk hunt. She taught them to read the wind, to respect the animal, to understand that hunting wasn't about killing. It was about being part of the landscape, about taking only what you needed, about honoring the exchange of life. They didn't get an elk that day, but they learned something more valuable. On the way back to the truck, the father asked, "You really won that international championship last week? I saw it on the news." She smiled. "Yes, sir." "And you're here teaching us to hunt?" "This is more important," she said simply. And she meant it. The Pentagon called a month later. The consulting program was approved, 2 weeks every spring. She'd bring her cousin, a traditional languages teacher, and together they'd teach soldiers not just to shoot, but to understand the land they operated in, to see like hunters, to think like people who'd survived in harsh terrain for thousands of years. The first session was scheduled for April. She'd prepared lessons on wind reading, natural navigation, conservation ethics applied to tactical movement. But more than that, she'd prepared stories. Because that's how her people taught, through stories that carried knowledge across generations. She'd tell the soldiers about her grandfather, about the deer in winter, about why every shot mattered, and maybe in some small way, she'd keep the old ways alive while helping protect the new. That balance between tradition and progress, between preservation and adaptation, that was the real challenge. Harder than any shot, more important than any medal. She stood on her porch that evening, coffee in hand, watching the sun set over the mountains where her grandfather had taught her to shoot, where his grandfather had taught him, where the knowledge had passed down through generations, adapting but never disappearing. And she understood finally what he'd been trying to tell her all along. The shooting wasn't the point. The winning wasn't the point. The point was the responsibility to the knowledge, to the community, to the land, to the future. She'd carried that responsibility to an international stage and shown the world that old ways weren't obsolete. They were foundational. And now she'd carry it forward, teaching others, preserving traditions, honoring those who came before. The medal was in a drawer somewhere. She hadn't looked at it since coming home. Didn't need to. The real prize was here, in the wind through pine trees, in the language of her people, in the stories yet to be told. And that prize couldn't be won or lost. It could only be protected, passed on, and lived every single day. The phone call came at dawn. She was already awake, coffee brewing, watching the mist rise off the valley below her cabin. The number was unfamiliar, but carried a Washington, D.C. area code. She answered on the third ring. "This is Colonel Mitchell, U.S. Army Special Operations Command." The voice was direct, professional, carrying the weight of someone accustomed to difficult conversations. "We need to discuss an urgent matter. It's regarding your recent competition performance and a situation that's developed overseas." She set down her coffee cup slowly. "I'm listening." "There's a hostage situation, high-altitude terrain. Conditions similar to what you demonstrated mastery of last month. Our assets on the ground are requesting consultation on a shot they need to make. A shot that's currently considered impossible by every analyst we have." Pause. "We need your assessment. Immediately." 20 minutes later, she was on a video call with a crisis management team. Faces filled the screen: generals, special operations commanders, intelligence analysts. They looked exhausted. This situation had been ongoing for 72 hours. A missionary group, 4 Americans, including 2 medical personnel, held in a compound 9,800 feet above sea level in a remote mountain region. The political situation prevented direct assault. One shot opportunity existed: a high-value target who appeared on a specific balcony every morning at dawn for exactly 90 seconds. The distance, 1,340 yards, uphill, wind patterns chaotic due to mountain thermals. Temperature differential affecting ballistics. Every variable hostile. They'd run the scenario through their best systems. Success probability, 11%. Unacceptable for a mission where failure meant immediate execution of hostages. They'd been preparing for 3 days. Time was running out. "Show me the terrain," she said. The screen shifted to satellite imagery. She studied it silently for 5 minutes, asked them to zoom in on specific features, ridgelines, vegetation patterns, shadow angles, then asked for meteorological data, not just current but historical, wind patterns for the past month, temperature variations, sunrise timing. "You have a shooter selected?" she asked. "Our best, Marine Scout sniper, 15 years experience, 273 confirmed hits in combat. He's saying the shot is possible but not probable. He's requesting a second opinion before he takes it. Put him on." A new face appeared, younger than she expected, maybe 30. Eyes that had seen too much. He looked at her with a mixture of hope and skepticism. "Ma'am, I've reviewed your competition footage. That was impressive shooting. But this is different. This is a shot that matters," she interrupted gently. "I understand. Walk me through your setup." He did. Precision rifle. Custom ammunition. Advanced ballistic computer. Laser rangefinder. Environmental sensors. Every technological advantage available. She listened, asked questions, processed. Then she asked something that made the entire room go quiet. "What's the vegetation at the firing position?" He blinked. "Ma'am?" "The plants, trees, scrub. What's growing there?" Confusion rippled through the command center. Someone pulled up ground-level reconnaissance photos. She studied them. "Those are junipers, high-altitude variety. That changes everything." "I don't understand," the Marine said. "Junipers at that altitude create specific wind patterns. The branches are dense. They channel air differently than pine or aspen. The wind you're measuring 50 feet away isn't the wind at your position. And at dawn, when the temperature differential is highest, that vegetation creates a thermal layer. Your ballistic computer doesn't account for that because it doesn't know what plants do to air movement." The room was absolutely silent. She continued. "Show me the approach route to the firing position." They did. She identified 3 specific points along the route. "Stop here, 30 minutes before dawn. Not for preparation, for observation. Watch how the mist moves through this valley. It'll tell you what the wind is actually doing, not what your sensors say it's doing. The land breathes differently at that altitude at dawn. You need to feel it, not measure it." The Marine was taking notes frantically. "How do you know this?" "Because I've hunted elk at 10,000 feet in Montana my entire life. The land speaks if you know how to listen. Your technology is good, but it's not raised in mountains. It doesn't know what mountains do." She paused. "Put your sensors away 1 hour before the shot. Trust your observations. Watch the mist, watch the vegetation move. Let your body tell you what the wind is doing." A general interrupted. "With respect, we're talking about a shot that could save 4 American lives. We can't base it on reading mist patterns." She looked directly at him through the camera. "General, your technology is giving you an 11% success rate. I'm offering you 50 years of indigenous knowledge about how mountains work. You called me. If you want sensor data, use sensors. If you want the shot to work, listen to someone whose ancestors survived in terrain like this for thousands of years." The room exchanged glances. The Marine spoke up. "Ma'am, I'll do it. I'll follow your protocol, but I need more details." For the next 90 minutes, she taught him. Not about shooting, he knew how to shoot. She taught him about reading terrain, about understanding that mountains are living systems, not static backdrops. About trusting observations over instruments when the two conflicted. She explained thermal inversions at altitude, how morning light lies about distance in thin air, why the first shot of the day from a cold barrel behaves differently at 10,000 feet than at sea level. Things she'd learned taking mountain goats and elk in conditions that would kill most people. Knowledge passed down through generations who had to understand these mountains or starve. "One more thing," she said as the call was ending. "Before you take the shot, say a prayer. Not for success, for responsibility. You're taking a life to save lives. That weight matters. Honor it." The Marine nodded slowly. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. The screen went dark. She sat in her cabin, hands shaking slightly. She just potentially influenced a life or death situation halfway around the world, using knowledge her grandfather taught her while tracking deer. The weight of it settled over her shoulders like a physical thing. 48 hours later, the phone rang again. Same number. She answered immediately. This is Colonel Mitchell. The shot was successful. The hostages are safe and en route home. The Marine asked me to tell you that he did everything exactly as you instructed. He watched the mist. He felt the wind. He said a prayer. And when the moment came, the shot felt certain. His word, not mine. Certain. She closed her eyes. Tears she hadn't expected came. Thank you for telling me. There's more. The Marine's commanding officer wants to discuss bringing you in for a formal training session. Not just the 2-week consultation we discussed. Something more comprehensive. They're calling it the Indigenous Tactical Knowledge Program. You teach principles, not just techniques. They want to document this before it's lost. She thought about her grandfather, about the young people on the reservation who were forgetting the old ways, about knowledge that was disappearing with every elder who passed. I'll do it under conditions. The program includes cultural education, language preservation. We don't just teach soldiers to read terrain. We teach them why our people developed this knowledge, the history, the context. It becomes a bridge, not an extraction. I'll make it happen, Colonel Mitchell said. Whatever you need. After the call ended, she walked outside. The sun was setting over mountains that had witnessed 10,000 years of her people's history. She felt her grandfather's presence somehow, in the wind, in the light. He'd taught her to hunt so her family could eat. She'd taken that knowledge and used it to save lives on the other side of the world. The circle was bigger than she'd ever imagined. That night, she called a council meeting. Elders and community leaders gathered in the tribal hall. She told them everything. The competition, the Pentagon consultation, the hostage rescue, the proposed training program. She laid it all out honestly, asking for guidance. An elder spoke first. Your grandfather would be proud, but he'd also be cautious. Our knowledge is precious. Once we share it, we can't control how it's used. I know, she said. That's why I need the council's blessing. This isn't my decision alone. This knowledge belongs to all of us. Debate lasted 3 hours. Arguments for and against. Finally, consensus emerged. They would support the program, but with strict protocols. Sacred knowledge remained protected. Only practical skills would be taught. And every session would include cultural education, ensuring that those who learned from them also learned about them. She called Colonel Mitchell the next morning. The council has approved. We start in 3 months. I'll need a team. Language teachers, cultural historians, traditional hunters. This isn't a one-person program. Understood. Send me a list of requirements. We'll make it work. 3 months later, she stood in front of 40 special operations personnel at a classified training facility in Colorado. Behind her, 3 tribal members, her cousin, the language teacher, an elder who'd hunted these mountains for 70 years, and a young man who was studying environmental science while maintaining traditional practices. You're here to learn how indigenous knowledge applies to tactical operations, she began. But before we teach you to read terrain, you need to understand who we are and why this knowledge exists. We're not just teaching you tricks. We're sharing a worldview. The first week was classroom-based. History, language basics, cultural context, philosophy of hunting as a spiritual practice, not just a skill, the relationship between humans and land, conservation ethics. Some of the soldiers were skeptical at first. By day 3, everyone was taking notes. The second week moved to the field. They hiked into high country, 11,000 feet, and she taught them what her grandfather had taught her. How to read animal trails and apply that to human movement patterns. How to identify water sources from vegetation changes. How to use natural features for navigation when technology failed. How to move through terrain without disturbing it. One evening, around a campfire, a Navy SEAL raised his hand. "Ma'am, I've been through every advanced training the military offers. I've learned land navigation from the best instructors, but nobody ever taught me to look at plants and know what the wind is doing. Why not? The elder answered. Because your military trains you to conquer terrain. We were raised to be part of it. Different purpose, different knowledge. You learn to dominate. We learn to belong. Another soldier, Army Ranger, spoke up. How do we reconcile that? Our job is literally to dominate terrain, to control it. She answered this one. You can control without conquering. You can move through landscape with respect instead of force. That doesn't make you weaker, it makes you smarter. An animal that dominates its environment eventually destroys it. An animal that belongs to its environment survives forever. Which one do you want to be? The question hung in the mountain air. These were warriors trained for aggression, for overwhelming force, for victory through superior firepower. She was asking them to consider a different kind of strength. The conversation lasted until midnight. 6 months into the Indigenous Tactical Knowledge Program, requests for training were backlogged 18 months. Special operations units from allied nations wanted access. The program had proven itself in field operations. Soldiers trained in indigenous methods were showing improved performance in complex terrain, reduced environmental impact, better long-term sustainability and extended operations. But success brought complications. Defense contractors wanted to monetize the knowledge. Academic institutions wanted to study it. Media wanted to document it. She refused all of them. This wasn't intellectual property to be commodified. It was living culture being shared carefully, intentionally, with specific purpose. She was in Washington for a briefing when the second crisis call came. This time it was different, bigger. A natural disaster, massive earthquake in a remote region, international rescue teams deployed but struggling, mountainous terrain, infrastructure destroyed, traditional access routes impassable, dozens of communities cut off, unknown number of casualties. We need someone who can navigate that terrain without roads, without GPS, using natural features, the emergency coordinator explained. We have satellite imagery, but we can't interpret it fast enough. We need someone who understands mountains. She looked at the maps, recognized the terrain type immediately. I need my team, and I need you to listen to what we tell you, even when it contradicts your technology. You have full authority. Save lives. That's the only priority. 48 hours later, she was on a military transport with 12 tribal members, hunters, trackers, traditional knowledge keepers. They'd volunteered immediately when she'd called. Below them, devastated landscape scrolled past. Collapsed bridges, blocked roads, isolated villages visible only from air. They established a base camp at the disaster periphery. Search and rescue teams were stalled, unable to reach communities beyond the destruction zone. She gathered her team and spread out topographical maps alongside satellite imagery. "Show me the water," she said. Her cousin traced invisible lines across the map. There and there, old stream beds. Even if current waterways are blocked, the land remembers where water flowed. Those valleys will be passable. The elder studied ridge lines. These slopes will hold. The rock structure is stable. But these, he pointed to specific areas, those will have secondary collapses. Avoid them. The environmental scientist overlaid vegetation data. These areas have root systems strong enough to stabilize soil, safe for foot travel even after seismic activity. Within 6 hours, they'd mapped out 12 routes into the isolated zone that conventional analysis had missed. Routes following natural features, ancient pathways, ecological indicators. They briefed the rescue coordinators, who were skeptical until a helicopter pilot confirmed the first route was indeed passable. "How did you know that was there?" the coordinator asked. "Because land doesn't change its fundamental nature," she explained. "Earthquakes destroy human construction, but the bones of the earth remain. We read the bones." Teams deployed using the indigenous mapped routes. They reached communities that had been cut off for 5 days, evacuated wounded, delivered supplies. Every route her team identified proved accurate. They found 7 villages that satellite analysis had missed entirely, settlements positioned in natural features that blended with terrain, invisible to technology but obvious to people trained to read landscape. On the sixth day, they encountered a problem. A village definitely occupied, smoke visible from air but no apparent access, steep canyon walls on 3 sides. Fourth side blocked by massive rock slide. Helicopter extraction impossible due to thin air and unstable conditions. Traditional rescue protocols said it was unreachable. She studied the canyon. Her grandfather's voice echoed in memory. Water always finds a way. Follow water backward. There's a cave system, she said suddenly. Has to be. That's why the village is there. Year-round water source means underground channels. We find the outlet, we trace it back, we find the entrance. The rescue coordinator looked at geological surveys. There's no documented cave system in this area. Because nobody asked the people who live here, she replied. Caves don't advertise themselves, but people who've lived somewhere for generations know every feature. They found the cave entrance 3 hours later, exactly where water flow patterns suggested it would be. Narrow, dark, but passable. She led a team through, moving by headlamp and instinct, following air currents and water sounds. 2 miles of underground travel, then daylight, then the village. 43 people, including 12 children, injured but alive, supplies nearly exhausted. They'd been praying for help that they thought couldn't come. When she emerged from the cave, an elderly woman collapsed to her knees, weeping, not from relief, from recognition of what had just happened. Someone had read the land correctly, had trusted traditional knowledge over modern limitation, had found the old way in. The evacuation took 18 hours. Every person brought out safely through a route that officially didn't exist. The rescue coordinator shook his head in amazement. We had satellites, drones, thermal imaging, and we couldn't find what you found by looking at how water moves. Different tools for different problems, she said. Your technology is incredible for what it does, but it doesn't replace understanding. It supplements it. The disaster response lasted 3 weeks. Her team identified 47 access routes, located 19 hidden communities, advised on 62 resource locations, and prevented 8 secondary disasters by correctly predicting terrain instability. The international rescue community took notice. Requests came from 6 countries for similar training. She returned to the reservation exhausted but certain. This was the path forward. Not replacing modern techniques but enhancing them with ancient wisdom. Not choosing between technology and tradition but using both correctly. A year later, the Indigenous Tactical Knowledge Program had expanded to include disaster response, environmental conservation, and wilderness medicine. Her team had grown to 24 full-time members and 87 part-time consultants from 17 different tribes. The program was headquartered on the reservation, ensuring that the knowledge remained connected to its source. She was training a new cohort of military personnel when the base commander pulled her aside. I need to tell you something. The Marine from that first hostage rescue, the shot you coached him through, he's requested transfer to the program. Wants to learn everything you can teach. Says that mission changed how he understands his job. The Marine arrived 2 weeks later. She recognized him immediately from the video call that had started everything. He was different now, quieter, more thoughtful. They spoke in her office, mountain light streaming through windows. That shot, he began. When I made it, I felt something I'd never felt before. Not pride, not relief, something else, like I'd become part of something bigger. The mountain, the wind, the moment, all of it connected. He paused, searching for words. I want to understand that feeling. I want to learn how to be part of the world instead of just operating in it. She smiled. That's going to take more than a 12-week course. I have time. I'm requesting extended assignment. 2 years if they'll approve it. They approved it. Over the following months, she taught him what her grandfather had taught her, not just tactical applications, the deeper knowledge, language lessons, cultural immersion, long days in the mountains, learning to see what he'd been looking at his whole career without truly seeing. One morning, 6 months into his training, they were tracking elk at dawn. He stopped suddenly, tilted his head. The wind just changed, coming from the northeast now. There's weather moving in, maybe 6 hours out. She nodded approvingly. How do you know? The way the aspens are moving. The birds just shifted their pattern, and I can feel it. In my skin. That's crazy, right? That's awareness. Your body has sensors more sophisticated than anything in a lab. You're finally learning to listen to them. They continued tracking. Found the elk. Observed without disturbing. Let the animals move off peacefully. On the hike back, he asked, "Why don't we hunt them? I mean, I know this is training, but do we need the meat today?" He thought about it. No. Then why take the life? Hunting isn't about killing. It's about relationship. About taking only what you need and honoring that exchange. The elk taught us things today. How they move, how they react to scent, how they use terrain. That's worth more than meat we don't need. He was quiet for a long time. Finally, I've been a Marine for 12 years. I've been trained to be the most efficient killer possible, and you're teaching me that the highest skill is knowing when not to kill. The highest skill is wisdom, she corrected gently. Killing is easy, restraint is hard. Understanding the difference between necessary and possible, that's mastery. That evening, he requested a meeting with his command. I want to redesign our training protocols, based on indigenous principles, not replacing current methods, enhancing them with ethical framework and ecological awareness. His commander was skeptical until she explained the practical benefits. Soldiers who understood ecosystem dynamics made better tactical decisions. Warriors who practiced restraint had better judgment under pressure. Teams that operated with environmental awareness left smaller footprints, generated less resentment, created more sustainable long-term presence. The proposal was approved. The Marine became the first military liaison permanently assigned to the program, bridge between two worlds, translator of knowledge systems. 3 years after the competition that changed everything, she stood on a stage at the United Nations, the Indigenous Knowledge Integration Summit, representatives from 40 nations. She'd been invited to speak about the program's success, about how traditional wisdom could enhance modern operations. She began with a story. My grandfather couldn't read or write English. The government sent him to boarding school when he was 6 to educate him. They cut his hair, punished him for speaking our language, tried to erase his culture. He ran away 3 times. Finally, they gave up, sent him home as unteachable. The room was silent. But my grandfather knew things those teachers never learned. He could navigate 100 miles of wilderness without a map, could predict weather 3 days out by watching birds, could find water in drought by reading plants. He survived and thrived using knowledge those educators considered primitive. She paused, let that sink in. 60 years later, his granddaughter used that same primitive knowledge to win an international shooting championship, assist in a hostage rescue, coordinate disaster response that saved hundreds of lives, and create a program that's transforming how militaries worldwide understand terrain operations. The knowledge was never primitive. The evaluation system was just incomplete. We're not asking you to abandon modernity. We're asking you to recognize that indigenous knowledge isn't alternative. It's foundational. You build on it. You don't replace it. Standing ovation. Requests for partnerships from 37 countries. Offers to fund expansion. She declined most of them. This isn't about scaling. It's about doing it right. Quality over quantity. Cultural integrity over rapid growth. On the flight home, she reviewed program statistics. Success rates in operations using indigenous trained personnel, up 34%. Environmental impact, down 56%. Community relations in operational areas, improved 78%. Equipment dependency, reduced 23%. Soldier wellness and retention, improved 41%. The numbers told a story, but not the whole story. The real story was in the letters she received, from soldiers who'd found purpose beyond mission, from communities who'd reconnected with traditional knowledge, from elders who'd found young people eager to learn the old ways, from parents whose children were learning their native language for the first time in 3 generations. The program had become something bigger than tactical training. It had become cultural revitalization, environmental protection, cross-cultural understanding, and proof that indigenous knowledge wasn't historical curiosity. It was living wisdom applicable to modern challenges. Back on the reservation, she resumed her regular work, guiding hunters, teaching language classes, training the next generation of knowledge keepers. The medal from the competition sat in a drawer somewhere. She rarely thought about it. What mattered was the work continuing. One afternoon, she was teaching a group of reservation teenagers traditional tracking. One girl, maybe 16, asked, "Why do we need to learn this? We have GPS. We have technology." She smiled. She'd been asked this question in 100 different ways. Technology is a tool. Knowledge is power. Tools break. Batteries die. Satellites fail. But if you know how to read the land, if you understand the principles, you're never lost. You're never helpless. You carry capability that no one can take from you. Another student. But when will we ever use this? Maybe never, or maybe in the most important moment of your life. My grandfather taught me to track deer so we could eat. I used that knowledge to help rescue hostages and coordinate disaster response. Knowledge doesn't know its own future. You learn it, carry it, and trust that it'll serve when needed. That evening she sat on her porch. The Marine, now fully trained, preparing to launch his own indigenous tactics program at Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton, joined her. They watched the sunset in comfortable silence. "I've been thinking," he said finally, "about that first shot, the one you coached me through. I've probably made 1,000 shots since then, but that one changed everything. Not because it was the hardest, because it was the first one where I understood I was part of something bigger than my own skill." "That's the difference between technique and wisdom," she said. "Technique is what you do. Wisdom is understanding why it matters and how it connects to everything else." He nodded. "I'm going to spend the rest of my career trying to teach that. The connection, the relationship, the responsibility. That's good work," she said. "Necessary work." 5 years after the competition, she received word that the program had been designated a permanent Department of Defense initiative, fully funded, culturally protected, tribally governed, the first indigenous-led program in DoD history with full operational authority. The announcement came with a request. Would she accept a civilian position as program director, equivalent to senior executive service? It would mean more travel, more administration, less time in the mountains. But it would also mean protecting the program's integrity, ensuring it stayed true to its roots, preventing it from being corrupted or commodified. She called a council meeting, sought guidance from elders, prayed in the old way, and accepted with conditions. The program headquarters would remain on the reservation. Decisions would be made collectively, not hierarchically. Cultural protocols would be non-negotiable, and she would spend at least 6 months per year in the field, teaching, learning, staying connected to the source. Year 6 brought international expansion, the first Canadian First Nations partnership, collaborations with Sami peoples in Scandinavia, agreements with Aboriginal Australians, Maori consultants from New Zealand. Each partnership carefully structured to honor local knowledge systems while sharing complementary insights. The Indigenous Tactical Knowledge Network was born, worldwide community of traditional knowledge keepers working with modern operational personnel. Not a hierarchy. A web. Each node connected, each tradition respected, each culture protected while contributing to collective wisdom. She traveled to Norway to meet with Sami reindeer herders who understood Arctic navigation in ways that astounded polar operations specialists. To Australia, where Aboriginal rangers demonstrated desert survival techniques that rewrote survival manuals. To New Zealand, where Maori navigation masters taught celestial orientation methods that worked when all technology failed. Everywhere, the same pattern. Indigenous peoples whose knowledge had been dismissed as primitive, proving that they'd developed sophisticated systems perfectly adapted to their environments. Modern operations learning that their technology was impressive but incomplete without foundational understanding. Year 7. A documentary filmmaker requested access. She declined. "This isn't entertainment. This is sacred work being shared carefully. When we're ready to share it publicly, we'll do it our way, on our terms, with our own storytellers." Year 8. Her cousin, the language teacher, developed an app that taught indigenous tracking principles through augmented reality. It won international awards and was adopted by outdoor education programs worldwide. Revenue was directed to tribal language revitalization programs. Year 9. The Marine she'd first coached retired from service and was hired as permanent program deputy director. His first initiative, creating indigenous knowledge preservation grants ensuring that elders were compensated for their teaching and their wisdom was documented for future generations. Year 10. She stood on the same shooting range where she'd won the championship that started everything. A memorial ceremony. The range was being renamed. Not after her. She'd refused that. After her grandfather. He was the true champion, she'd said. I just carried forward what he taught me. The plaque read, in honor of indigenous knowledge, keepers whose wisdom connects past and future, tradition and innovation, land and people. Their teachings save lives, protect environments, and remind us that the oldest knowledge is often the most essential. She stood before that plaque, tears streaming, and felt his presence. Felt the circle complete. He'd taught her to hunt so her family could eat. She'd taken that teaching and created something that honored his memory while serving the future. The knowledge had survived, adapted, thrived. That night, alone in the mountains under stars her ancestors had navigated by, she reflected on the decade. From competition winner to consultant to director of an international program preserving and applying indigenous knowledge. From personal achievement to cultural movement. From proving herself to protecting her people's wisdom. The journey had been unexpected. But standing there, feeling the wind that her grandfather had taught her to read, understanding that his knowledge was now teaching thousands of people worldwide, honoring the land while protecting lives. This felt right. This felt like the purpose she'd been born to fulfill. She'd won a championship by shooting straight, but the real victory was keeping her grandfather's teachings alive. Was showing the world that indigenous knowledge wasn't primitive, it was essential. Was building bridges between cultures while protecting cultural integrity. Was ensuring that the old ways weren't lost but transformed, adapted, shared, and honored. Tomorrow she'd return to work. More training sessions, more partnerships to develop, more young people to teach, more wisdom to preserve. But tonight, she simply stood in the presence of the mountains that had shaped her, grateful for the grandfather who'd taught her to see them truly, and certain that the work would continue long after she was gone. The rifle that had won the championship hung above her desk now, cleaned and maintained but rarely fired. It had served its purpose. The real weapon was knowledge. The real ammunition was wisdom. And the real target was a future where indigenous peoples were recognized not as relics of the past but as guides to a sustainable future. She'd taken her shot, and it had changed everything.